Okay, welcome in. I'm now going to be reviewing all of Week 8's action of the NFL season. I will go through all the teams that I did predict that would win and the teams that actually would win, the scores, and where they stand now. There were no teams on their bye week in Week 8, so all 32 teams were in action, so therefore there were 16 games on tap. So starting with the Thursday night matchup between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Buffalo Bills. I did predict that Buffalo would win, and they did. 24-18 was the final score. The Bills are now sitting at 5-3, and Tampa has now fallen to 3-4. For me, the big question going into next week are the Bills finally back on the win column? Because it seems like it's win lose win lose win lose, and this is something that they cannot afford to do if they want to be competitive, especially in that AFC East with the Dolphins in first place. So for the Bills, it's a great win, but can they be consistent? That's my only question moving forward. So starting with the next matchup, which was on Sunday, and heading to Carolina, and they took on the Houston Texans. I did predict that Carolina would finally get their first win of the season, and they did. Holy cow! It just took 8 weeks for that to happen. 15-13 was the final score. So with that, Carolina is now sitting at 1-6, and the Houston Texans have dropped to 3-4. The next matchup takes place in Texas, where we have the host Dallas Cowboys, and they took on the Los Angeles Rams. I did predict that Dallas would get the victory, and they sure did. 43? Is that it? 43-20? Yeah. Blowout, to say the least. I gotta double check this one. My writing's a little messy. While I'm double checking the score, so with the victory, the Cowboys are now sitting at 5-2, and with the loss, the Rams are now sitting at 3-5. So not the start to the season for the Rams that they would have expected. So far with my picks, while I'm waiting for the app to load up, I am 3 for 3. So I think I did pretty decently on my Week 8 predictions. Scores. Just double check. Yeah, 43-20. So I was correct. All right. And the next matchup takes place in Wisconsin, where we have the host team in the Green Bay Packers, who are shaky, to say the least, and they were taking on an NFC North foe in the Minnesota Vikings. I did predict that the Vikings would win. They did, but unfortunately, it came with a huge loss at the same time. The final score was 24-10. The Packers have now dropped to 2-6, and the Minnesota Vikings got back to 500 football at 4-4. But now the big thing with that is Kirk Cousins is now out for the season. So the question for the Vikings going forward now is who's going to be their quarterback? Who can they have someone that can step up and basically replace Kirk Cousins? Now that you're back to 500 football, if you can keep winning, obviously you could be in contention and stay in contention for an NFC wildcard position. But again, if you don't have Cousins at the helm, who's going to be your quarterback moving forward? So a lot of questions and a lot of question marks if you're a Vikings fan. The next matchup takes place in Indiana, where we have the host Indianapolis Colts, and they took on the New Orleans Saints. So I did predict that the Saints would get the victory, and they did. It was a high-scoring affair to say the least. 38-27 was the final score. The Colts have now dropped to 3-5, and with the victory, the Saints are now back to 500, sitting at 4-4. Our next matchup takes place in the AFC East, where we have the red-hot Miami Dolphins, and they're playing host to the New England Patriots. I did predict that the Dolphins would get the victory, and they did. 31-17 was the final score. The Dolphins are now sitting at 6-2 atop of that AFC East division, while the Patriots have now dropped to 2-6. The next matchup takes place in New York, where we have two teams that share the same stadium. And that is the New York Football Giants and the New York Jets. I did predict that the Jets would get the victory. It was a very low-scoring affair, to say the least. 13-10 was the final score. With that loss, the Giants are now sitting at 2-6, and with the victory, the Jets are now at 4-3. The next matchup takes place in the Steel City, where we have the host Pittsburgh Steelers, and they took on the Jacksonville Jaguars. I did predict that Jacksonville would win, and they sure did. 20-10 was the final score. With that loss, the Steelers are now sitting at 4-3, and with the victory, the Jaguars are sitting nice and comfortably in that AFC South at 6-2. The next matchup takes place in Tennessee, where we have the Titans, who took on the Atlanta Falcons. Coming into this matchup, there wasn't that much consistency from either team, if I want to be completely realistic. Yes, the Falcons did have the better record coming into this matchup, but again, inconsistency was the big thing for me. The final score was 28-23 in favor of the Titans. They are now sitting at 3-4, while the Falcons have dropped to 500. While the Falcons have dropped to 500 football, they are now sitting at 4-4. And I did predict that the Falcons would win, but obviously the Titans did win, so that was my first L of my predictions. The next matchup takes place in Washington, where we have the Commanders, and they were playing host to an NFC East foe in the Philadelphia Eagles. I believe everybody would have predicted that the Eagles would have gotten the victory in this one. I don't think anyone would have guessed it'd be that high scoring of an affair or a one-score difference, but 38-31 was the final score. With that victory, the Eagles are now sitting at 7-1, and with the loss, the Washington Commanders have now dropped to 3-5. The next match takes place in Seattle, where we have the host team in the Seahawks, and they took on the Cleveland Browns. I did predict that Cleveland would get the victory. It was a close matchup, to say the least, but unfortunately they were not able to secure the W. 24-20 was the final score. The Seahawks are now sitting at 5-2, and the Cleveland Browns are sitting at 4-3. Staying in the NFC West, the Arizona Cardinals took on the Baltimore Ravens. So two teams with birds as their mascots. Take a look here once I pull up the logos for said teams. So I did predict that Baltimore would get victory. It was pretty high scoring, to say the least, and I didn't think it was going to be a one-score game. I honestly thought that the Ravens would have walked all over the Cardinals in a sense. 31-24 was the final score. With that loss, the Cardinals have now dropped to 1-7, and with the victory, the Ravens have now improved to 6-2. So they're sitting atop of that AFC North division. The next matchup takes place in also the NFC West, where we have the host San Francisco 49ers, and they took on a team from the AFC North as well in the Cincinnati Bengals. I can pull their logos up. You should see it on the screen here right away. I did think that San Fran would bounce back after losing 2 straight games, but unfortunately, their losing streak still continues. They dropped this contest 31-17. So with the loss, San Fran's now sitting at 5-3, and with the victory, since he's finally got back to above 500, and it seems like they're finally back to their old selves, they're sitting at 4-3. The next matchup, quite possibly the biggest upset, and I couldn't be happier, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, took place in the AFC West, where we had the host Denver Broncos and the Kansas City Chiefs. The streak is finally over. It just took, I want to say, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, almost 8 years to finally get a victory over their AFC West foe. Final score was 24-9. The Broncos, with that victory, are now sitting at 3-5, and with the loss, the Chiefs are now at 6-2. So there's really no panic if you're a Chiefs fan, but not getting a touchdown is a little concerning, to say the least. All right, on to the Sunday night action, where we had the host Los Angeles Chargers, and they took on the Chicago Bears. Now, for some reason, I was feeling a little bold and a little cocky, thinking, both teams only had 2 wins coming into this matchup, so I didn't really have a dog into who I thought would win or who I thought would be more dominant, but I picked the wrong team. I thought the Bears might have come in and got an upset over the Chargers, but the Chargers actually put a bit of a hurt, to say the least, on the Bears. 30-13 was the final score. With the victory, the Chargers are now sitting at 3-4, and with the loss, the Bears are now sitting at 2-6. The last game takes place in Michigan, where we have the Detroit Lions, and they were taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. I did predict Detroit would get the victory, and boy oh boy did they ever. 26-14 was the final score. With that win, the Lions are now sitting at 6-2, atop of that NFC North division, and with the loss, the Raiders have now dropped to 3-5. So, take a look at my overall record. Where am I? So I'll go over my week 8 picks. So I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So I was 13-3 on my picks for week 8. And I'm just going to check my overall record. Where am I? 55-41, 55. 55, 41, 13. So that'd be 71 and 44. Wow. So my overall record now is 71-44 with my predictions so far in the NFL season. So I had an absolute dominant week in week 8. So I'm not complaining, to say the least. As always, if you like this type of content and you're new to the channel, feel free to hit the sub button. I'd be very grateful and very appreciative at the same time as I do videos on the daily. And as always, take care.